when it's Fahrenheit, anything from 40
Mhm.
to 50, when winter is not yet over, is good. You have to take that and
Mm,
celebrate.
mm, Yeah, speaking of winter and celebration, we'll go for our first story of the day. We'll go to the Congo, and the story comes from Al Jazeera, and it's titled "People Need a Break." Something we've often emphasized here with regards to the Congo crisis, and it reads: People need a break. DRC Congo conflict reignites dark memories of Congo's wars. Is a deadly past replaying for Congo as M23 fighters, I won't use that term, march on Kinshasa amid presence of Rwanda and Ugandan troops. And the story is filed in by Shola Lawal. In parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo, M23 rebels are gearing up for war or fleeing to safety amidst the advance of M23 rebels who captured the key eastern city of Goma and Bukavu in recent weeks, leaving devastation in their wake. For those who are not familiar with what we're talking about, can you just give them a recap of what they mean by a replay of the war that happened in the
Sure.
past that brought in
So
multiple players?
in 1996, 97,
Mhm.
um, Congo, it was then Zaire under Mobutu.
Yeah.
The dictator Mobutu, the assassin of Patrice Lumumba, the CIA agent. Mobutu was a CIA agent
Oh,
by
whoa. Okay.
1959. By 1959, officially, even before Congo's independence, they had already recruited him when he had traveled to Belgium, to Brussels.
Okay.
So they installed Mobutu, and of course he ran the country down, but he was serving Western interests, so he was able to be in power. Every time the Congolese tried to throw him, the West would intervene. They would send Moroccan troops airdropped by the American planes and American weapons. So that's how it was sustained. So
Hmm.
Mobutu was detested by Africans, by Pan-Africans. So when finally the country was invaded from Rwanda and Uganda in 96, 97, nobody shed any tears for Mobutu. And Laurent Kabila, who actually had been, is very interesting. His resistance actually goes way to the 60s.
Yep.
Laurent Kabila was the person whose guerrilla outfit Che Guevara went
Yes.
to train in the
Hmm.
1960s. So he was an authentic resistance leader and a supporter of Patrice Lumumba from the 1960s, you see? So he was installed as the new ruler of the Congo.
That
But
was in
then,
97.
correct, when he saw that Uganda and Rwanda wanted to impose their hegemony, because particularly interest in resources, of course, that's what they were interested. It wasn't like they had any major ideological difference with Mobutu.
Mm-hmm.
After all, both of them, General Museveni and General Kagame, are also dictators, correct?
Yep.
So the intervention primarily was for the resources of the Congo.
Hmm.
And when they started actualizing that, started to steal resources and started to literally be more powerful than Laurent Kabila, which of course they were because they provided the army to put
Hmm.
him in power.
Well, of
He
course, of
didn't like
course.
that. So he decided to exercise the powers that a president ordinarily has and order them to leave.
Hmm.
And they said, "Are you out of your mind? We put you in power and you
What
don't
did you
have an
do?
army. We are your army." So they refused to leave. Instead, they tried to
Undermine his.
officially get rid of him, overthrow him.
Hmm.
And that's when he called for assistance from a number of African countries, the principal ones that really helped him to defeat that a second invasion by Rwanda and Uganda were the armies of Zimbabwe and Angola. So they managed to push back the second invasion and defeat the second invasion. But since that time, the eastern part of the Congo has been pretty much a no man's zone. Part of it controlled by Rwanda and part of it controlled by Uganda. And he has tried to regain control of that region by bringing in the intervention forces from South Africa, from Tanzania, from Malawi, I believe, from Burundi. So that's been the status quo since then, with the ebbs and flows. Rwanda and Uganda have both financed. There were groups before, the one that is now called M23, and currently it's M23. And there's now been a resurgence of both Rwanda and Uganda wanting to stamp their footprints in Eastern Congo, which is very resource mineral rich. The latest is what we're seeing unfolding with Rwanda, AKA M23, seizing the cities of Goma and Bukavu.
Yep.
And of course, it's been covered, well covered in terms of the violence that they've committed. Estimated 7,000 civilians have been killed. The reports of the horrific rapes of women and even children. Clearly, Congo has not been able to exercise control over the eastern region for a very long time now, even before the current president, Tshisekedi. Even with Kabila's son, Joseph Kabila, who succeeded his father, he was not able to exercise control in Eastern Congo and had the very contentious type of relationship with Rwanda and Uganda that the current president also has with Rwanda and Uganda. More so with Rwanda for the time being.
Okay.
So that's the backdrop.
Okay, so I continue. So it goes on, which is what you've expressed here. The rebel group, which the United Nations says is backed by Nibo, Rwanda, is also closing on Walikale, a major mining hub, which Kinshasa offers of a
Right.
5
So
million.
I would have a suggestion for Al Jazeera and for all those that write, because obviously words are very critical. If I'm writing an article like this, I would not call them a rebel group, because in some countries you have genuine, authentic rebellions that are sometimes warranted and even justified, you see, when there's a domestic dispute, right? But when you have a war of aggression from neighboring states and you refer to rebels, then it disguises and it distorts the conflict and misinforms the reader. So I would use proxy. And they've never used the term proxy, which would be much more accurate, actually, because M23 is a proxy for both Rwanda and for Uganda as well.
Uganda.
But go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So, and so while the proxy marches in on North and South Kivu, Ugandan troops have intensified deployment across their border with the DRC in Ituri province, only a few hours away from the rebel-held areas. The Ugandan army says it is battling the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, and the Cooperative for the Development of Congo, Codeco, two of the several dozen armed groups operating in the DRC. A recent flare-up of Codeco's attacks on civilians in February saw at least 51 people killed, prompting Uganda to send additional soldiers to boost its 5,000-strong deployment inside the DRC. So,
okay,
go on.
So, that's all Ugandan propaganda. So Congo is so weak that Uganda has this called the Allied Democratic Front, which many times I've tweeted I don't believe it's independent of Uganda. I believe this is a group that Museveni himself sustains, just like he sustained Joseph Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army in the northern part of Uganda, to give him the umbrella to intervene militarily in the Congo and continue stealing resources, because Museveni does not care about peace and stability. You cannot restore peace and stability in a neighboring country when you don't have it in your own country, which is Uganda. His interest is resources, to continue plundering. And he's saying, if Kagame is stealing, how can I not be allowed to steal as well? So when they talk about a flare-up of conflict by this other group, which I'd never even heard of before, that is also, in my view, a Ugandan creation. So what Uganda is trying to do is to still play ball with President Tshisekedi, say, oh, let's work together, we'll help you restore peace in this part, when he's in fact the one instigating the conflict, not at a maximum level, like the way Kagame is doing, but at a minimal level that allows him to deploy some. But if things deteriorate for the Congo, and M23 is not contained or defeated and expands, and it looks like the government itself in the Congo, in Kinshasa, is under jeopardy, then Museveni will become more aggressive and start seizing territory, just like the way Kagame is doing. Museveni, I've studied him for such a long time. Now, I can think his thoughts before he thinks them.
And now that he's grown slower as well.
He's become so predictable.
Okay, I'll go on. So, for political observers, the growing presence of both Rwanda and Ugandan soldiers in the DRC is an eerie replay of a painful past, one they fear could again lead to a bigger regional war, if not contained. We are indeed seeing a replica of the Second Congo War, which you explained earlier, with the same actors, but in a slightly different configuration. Analyst Paul Natuluya of the African Center for Strategic Studies told Al Jazeera, referring to the leading roles both countries played in what is now referred to as the 1998 Great African War, when Rwanda and Ugandan troops invaded the DRC. Several African countries have also followed suit, backing either the DRC or the Rwandan-led side, as many as a dozen of local militias on either end. The result was a humanitarian crisis that saw an estimated 5 million deaths. The DRC looted on mineral resources like gold and the emergence of dozens of armed groups, including the M23. At the time, thousands across the globe protested against the atrocities in the DRC, calling for an end to the looting and the killing. Today, illegal mining and smuggling from the DRC mines, which provided 70% of the global supply of coltan and cobalt that powers electronics, have largely continued, as have deaths and displacement due to armed group activity. You want to say a word?
Yeah, I mean, you've outlined how things are deteriorating. M23, aka Rwanda, they've not been able to sustain. And the army of Congo, it's clear that they lack commanders. If they had commanders, they would be able to repulse this aggression and drive them back, in fact, into both Rwanda and into Uganda. But they don't have commanders. You have men on the ground. Men will not fight unless they have commanders that can give them proper battle execution plans and also inspire them. You know, people fight based on the quality of the commanders that they have. If they had the kind of commanders who commanded the let me see, the forces in Tigray, for example, right? They were able to push back the Ethiopian / Eritrean assault on that region, because they've always had brilliant commanders. You know, they were managed to build a new force, and because of the quality of the commanders, they were able to push the fight back. So that conflict which fortunately has now subsidized. It's still there, but not at the level that we saw like 2 years ago.
Years ago, yeah.
The tide shifted because of the quality of the commanders. It's clear to me that Congo's army does not have the quality of commanders. So unless they can get commanders from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, from Angola, I don't see how they can shift the tide. And only Angola, Zimbabwe, as I said, and South Africa have the kind of armed force that would be able to contain both Rwanda and Uganda, because that's what happened in beginning from 1998 up to 2003, 2004. So that's the kind of intervention that Congo would need. It's evident to me that doing it with its own armed forces, the way things have been going the last several weeks, it's very, very clear that on their own, they're not able to shift the tide. And for strategic reasons, Angola could actually have an incentive, because Congo now is involved with Angola in the Lobito corridor, you see? So unless they've calculated that the Lobito really relies on the other parts of Congo, including the Katanga region. And so if that region was threatened, then perhaps it would be worth us escalating our support of the Congo or becoming fully involved. But if only the East is being threatened and would not disrupt Lobito, I think Angola might say, well, let them find other ways of dealing with that.
Well, you recounted the African War, the genesis that started in 1996, 97. And there's a book out there titled The African War by Gerard Brunier.
Yes, I believe I have that book. I haven't read it, but I do. I have it, actually. I got it from the Strand.
Oh, yeah. Listen.
Our favorite store.
Yeah, favorite store. Yeah. I got this from the Strand as well when I came to your side. So, this book covers all of what the comrade said. And also there's another book by, what's the gentleman's name? Howard French. The Continent for a Taking. Yeah, that is another brilliant book that covers the rise of Kabila, his fall, the fall of Mobutu, the rise of Kabila, and his subsequent fall. So, and then brings all the players into the picture.
That's good. Yeah, I know Howard. He was one of the few New York Times correspondents whom I respected and interacted with. I've been on a panel discussion with him at Columbia University. So yes, I respect Howard.
Howard French's book, The African Continent, The Continent for the Taking, Africa, the Continent for the Taking. It's the title of the book. So, speaking of for the taking, we go to our next story, which comes from your friends, the BBC, the ones that refused. So again, he's talking about Congo, and it goes along the line: is Trump mulling a mineral deal with conflict-hit DRC Congo? And the story reads: the Democratic Republic of Congo appears to be turning to the U.S. in its latest effort to find an ally in its fight against advancing M23 rebels. They still have not taken heed. Recognizing that the White House of President Trump is interested in transactional relationships and seeing the proposed Ukraine-US mineral deal, the resource-rich DRC is hoping to strike its own agreement with Washington. It has also been reported that Trump is soon to appoint the father-in-law of his daughter, Tiffany, to a key role in the region. Congolese government spokesman Patrick Muyaya confirmed to the BBC Newsday program that his country wanted to bring the US on board and supply it with some critical minerals. Your initial thought with this plan? Because when I was reading the story, I was like, we've been here before. What is going on here? Yeah.
Well, here's the sad thing about it.
Mm.
We've already discussed how weak the Congolese military is,
Mhm.
lack of commanders. So this is obviously an act of desperation, hoping that the military superiority of Rwanda and Uganda can be checked with a U.S. interest and the incentives that Congo is offering, the minerals that the Congo possesses, which it has plenty of. And here's the irony.
Well,
As Patrice Lumumba was standing there facing the firing squad, you know, he refused to be blindfolded because he
yeah,
wanted to
yeah.
look at his killers, right?
Killers in the eye. That's what he said. Yeah.
So can you imagine that Patrice Lumumba would think that decades after his assassination, right? We are
I see where
talking
you're
what?
going with this.
We're
I
talking
see.
54 years, right?
Yes, yes.
After his assassination, right?
Hmm.
We're talking, 64 years, 64
Yes,
after
64,
his
64.
assassination.
Yeah,
That
61,
one
61.
day, the country that collaborated in the overthrow of his government and his assassination would one day be the same country upon which Congo would call upon for protection. Just think about the irony.
Mm.
You cannot even write this script up in Hollywood, but that's what it is. The country that helped take the life of Patrice Lumumba is now the country that is being called upon to assist in stanching this war of aggression
Mm.
from Rwanda and Uganda. The irony. But in the absence of the kind of support that Laurent Kabila got from Angola and Zimbabwe when the second invasion of the Congo had occurred from Rwanda and Uganda, he may think that that is the only option that he now has. And it has a chance of succeeding. I'm not saying that it will, but it has a chance of getting US interest because, as you know, the US president has made it clear that if something is in it for the United States, then he might be interested. They're trying to get Ukraine to sign this deal. Initially, it was for $500 million, or is it billion? 500 billion worth of resources, right? And now it's a joint fund that the U.S. would have control over, but Ukraine would also have interest in. So there's this configuration of arrangements. So as the Congo is listening to that and they're seeing how interested this U.S. president was in such a project, obviously some people decided to get together in the Congo and draw up a similar proposal. And that is what they're pitching to the U.S. now. And if it has less strings attached than what Ukraine seems to be offering, then there's a possibility the U.S. might take an interest. And the person that they mentioned, the father-in-law to President Trump's daughter, is a business person involved in real estate, involved in some businesses in some African countries as well. And if he goes and evaluates and he likes the meeting with the people in the Congo, he might come back and tell Trump, yeah, let's go ahead with this proposal. But that would just be a stopgap measure. At the end of the day, Congo needs a national army that can protect the sovereignty and the citizens of the Congo.
Okay. So you invoked the name of Patrice Lumumba in the beginning. And I want to also now tie that to the fact that if we don't know what the American interest would look like or how to shore up said interest would look like, would you countenance the idea of US troops being based in Congo?
No, I don't think they would need a
Troops on the
a,
ground.
a substantive U.S. force. U.S. resources could make a vast difference. You know, if Trump gets on board, it means Musk is on board as well.
Okay.
So they would have all the satellite images. They would have, which they have already, by the way, right now anyway. But now they would be inclined to use it because now you're protecting your own interests. So on the intelligence level alone, on the weapons sophisticated levels alone, that would be no match for Rwanda and Uganda. And Rwanda and Uganda, who are actually fed
by the
US and by Europe, would not dare to be on the opposite side of the United States. So as soon as the US commits and says their interests, that's the end of this conflict.
Okay. So, but there's a side we're not looking at, and I'll continue with the story. You will see where I'm going with that. So why is there a talk of a deal? You've explained that with regards to the interest of the stuff going on in Ukraine, which forms the idea of, bringing in the United States. Now, what could it be in it for the US? The DRC is estimated to have 24 trillion what? That's 19 trillion pounds of untapped resources, including cobalt, gold, and copper.
And that's probably an underestimate because that survey was done a long time ago. That survey was done a long time ago. And since then, more resources have been so I read that statistic. I've been reading that statistic for a very long time. it may actually be doubled what is being said there. I would be not surprised if it's even 50 trillion to 100 trillion.
Wow. The country is currently the world's largest supplier of cobalt, which has defense and aerospace applications as well as essentials for batteries in electric vehicles. But most of this goes to China. It also has significant lithium, tantalum, and uranium deposits, which have military uses. I mean, we know the uranium was used in the 2 bombs that was dropped on Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Though the US is investing in a huge infrastructure project, the Lobito Corridor, designed to transport goods out of Central Africa to a port in Angola, its companies are not involved in mining in the US. So with that in mind, so you've got 2 blind sides for that potential deal. One is China, and 2 is the corridor, the railway that is already proposed. Now, will the railway be sufficient enough for the United States to come in? Or would it be a case of extending our interest beyond the railway, then vis-a-vis coming in contact with China? Because there is no way you cannot do that. Or that would not happen, rather.
Oh, no. I mean, a number of things. The railway, Trump is not interested in that as much. That's, development project. He would be more interested in the quid pro quo. The quid pro quo is the resources, the cobalt, the coltan, and those are in Eastern Congo. And in order to get to those resources in Eastern Congo, you have to push out Rwanda and push out Uganda. And that is what they're pitching to Trump. So the sort of different projects. The Lobito one, I think the only question about that was, would the U.S. continue funding that one? And I think so far, there's been no disruption or decision to stop funding that project. So this one is sort of like a new pitch. And in terms of China being a potential obstacle, I don't see that happening because I think some of these deals that Congo already has with China, they would have to restructure those deals. Because if it comes to a question of restructuring a deal or not being able to get the help that we need from the US to stay in power, then of course they could make it very uncomfortable because after all, the minerals are not in China, they're in Congo, you see? So in order for you to tap into those resources, the Congolese government, for number one, has to be in place, has to be in power, number one. Number
True.
two, it has to be reasonably happy to continue working with you. So I think, I don't see China being able to disrupt Congo's desire to conclude some sort of a deal with the United States as well. Congo would say, there's enough for everybody here, but we're not going to allow you to block a deal that might allow us to remain in power.
Okay. Okay. So I'll take one final part. And where is it? Yes. The question is, which is what you've just alluded to, is how could the DRC benefit? One key area would be in strengthening military cooperation, as the letter to Rubio puts it. This will involve training and equipping soldiers to protect mineral supply routes, giving the U.S. access to military bases to protect, which is the part I spoke about earlier, and replacing ineffective UN peacekeeping operations with direct
Correct.
U.S. DRC security cooperation.
Correct. Absolutely. That can be done, where the U.S. basically would provide the logistical support, they would man and control the sophisticated weapons that they would put. There's no way, if you have even a presence of like 25 or 50 U.S. personnel on the ground, that Rwanda and Uganda would drop artillery shells in that region. Just no way at all. It won't happen, you see? And then, countries like Angola, Zimbabwe might be much more willing to even provide manpower now, because they know that they have, the backing of a country that can now. And, even salaries alone for these soldiers put a strain on some of these governments. So if Congo has a deal, the U.S. is even covering the logistics and, paying for the forces, and they're being compensated with the minerals. There's no shortage of ideas of how Congo can really construct a deal. But as I said, that would only be short run. At the end of the day, they need to have an efficient professional army. If they cannot come up with a deal, then I would say they really lack imagination and manpower. There's enough there for them to be able to come up with a deal, because normally it would be like, United States doesn't want to get involved in any more conflict, not the least a conflict on the African continent, deploying U.S. troops on the ground. But this is a bit different. Somalia was different. Somalia, you went to try and get after General Aidid. So you went with war intentions, and Aidid fought back, and they shot down the helicopter. You see?
Yeah.
Now, you're coming to secure peace. And I don't see any circumstance under which Rwanda or Uganda can go after U.S. personnel, because they're so dependent on the West for their survival. So to take a hostile position against the people that feed you and sustain you, I don't see that happening.
It's almost like a death
Right.
wish.
But that does not mean that they'll be able to come up with a deal, because as you know, the U.S. president is also very unpredictable.
Very much so. Very much so. It depends on what time of day it is. And speaking of unpredictability, we'll go to east of Congo. We'll go to a lovely country, considered one of the greenest in Africa. And I'm speaking to the country of Uganda. And appears that they want to make a break from their colonial past. And the story comes from The Guardian. It says campaigners celebrate court ruling to decolonize Kampala. After a 5-year campaign, landmarks and streets honoring British colonialists will be renamed to reflect Ugandan culture. Your initial take?
No, I mean, this is something that I've been involved in for a very long time. Not this particular project, but around the time that the same project was being launched, I was actually, I hope that they might have even been inspired by what I was doing. I had launched petitions for Lake Victoria to be
Oh.
given an indigenous African or Ugandan name. I launched another campaign saying Victoria Falls should also be given an indigenous
It's
African name.
got an indigenous name. It's got an
It's,
indigenous name. It's just
it's
that,
not being applied. It's not being
yeah,
used.
yeah.
So in the tourist brochures that they put to invite people to come, they're not using the African names, you see? So yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm happy with this, that, it's caught on and that it's now actually being implemented, in Uganda. And I will hope that many other African countries do something similar to that. Why should we have a city called Pretoria in South Africa? Why should we have a city called Johannesburg in South Africa?
Or Port
Port
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. So yeah, we need to revisit all these things. I'm a big proponent of these kind of campaigns.
Okay, I would read a bit, and it goes on. It says, and the story is filed in by Samuel Okiro in Kampala. And it says campaigners have welcomed a court's ruling to remove British colonial monuments from Ugandan's capital, Kampala, and to rename streets that honor crooks and historical figureheads. In last week's High Court ruling, Justice Musa Sekena directed the city authorities to remove the name of British figures from streets, monuments, and other landmarks. These include Major General Henry Edward Cofield, an early commissioner of the Ugandan Protectorate, and Frederick Lugard, a prominent colonial official in Africa with a reputation for cruelty. He was
And
actually,
racism. They left that out.
yes,
Cruelty and racism.
yeah, yeah. He was actually involved with Nigeria as well.
Of course, he
He
was the
did the
governor.
amalgamation. Yeah, he did the amalgamation of the North and South. So
Mhm.
new names will be found for roads and parks that reflect Uganda's culture after the ruling, which was the culmination of a 5-year campaign. In 2020, more than 5,008, 2020, that's almost like 5 years ago.
Yes.
5,800 people signed a petition asking MPs to decolonize and rename dozens of statues and streets honoring colonialists. And last year, John Septoa, a human rights activist, filed a lawsuit in Kampala claiming the roads named by the British during violated Ugandans' right to dignity and freedom from cruel treatment. So you think people who have the Great Makerere University will wait this long to decolonize the streets of Kampala? Why do you think that was the case?
Right. I think as prominent African intellectuals have reminded us, one of the hardest challenges for Africans to really be comfortable with who they are.
Yeah.
Many Africans still are not spiritually, psychologically, and fully willing to embrace their Africanness, right? Or Africanity. And they want some sort of ties, even symbolic ties to imperialism and empire and Europeanness. They're not fully convinced that things that are African could actually be better, you see?
Yeah.
And that's just my assessment, because it shows a lack of understanding of history. Because culture and civilizations, were being constructed in Africa before European countries existed.
True.
You see?
True.
So if more knew that, they would not hesitate. They would not wait 60 plus years after independence to be doing things that should have been done. The week after independence, you see? So that's my own evaluation. Sankara understood the importance of the symbolism. So one of the first things he did when he came to power We are no longer Upper Volta. We are Burkina Faso. It connects to us. It relates to us. It has meaning for us. A definite meaning. In that case, land of the righteous people, the upright
Yeah.
people. You see?
The upright people. Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so that people on a daily basis they're taking pride in themselves when they wake up. I'm a Burkinabe. You see? Symbolism is very important.
Mm. Mm.
Don't let anybody underestimate, you know?
So, do you think this campaign would spread across Africa, or is going to be an isolated
I hope
event?
so. I think there are enough young people now across the African continent who know how to promote campaigns on social media.
Okay.
Now, one of the big campaigns that young people are promoting is Borderless Africa, right?
Yeah.
The campaign that young people are promoting was to get rid of French imperialism in West Africa. I think a campaign can be constructed in a clever way that would also, you know, capture the imagination of the youth of Africa. And I think you can use the name of Sankara, you can look at what he did with Burkina Faso. And if that is integrated in the messaging, yeah, I can see that campaign picking up.
Mm. Mm. It's also when you mention intellectuals have done the work with regards to this aspect of it. One of the um, foremost writers in Africa, still walking the earth, Ngugi wa Thiong'o.
In fact, you know, when I started saying intellectuals, I forgot to give their names. Obviously, I met him. I was
So
going to
yeah,
say his name and also, of course, Fanon as well. But yeah, go ahead.
Fanon, yeah, Frantz Fanon, yes. So I mean, Frantz Fanon, Ngugi wa Thiong'o wrote the book titled "Decolonizing the Mind,"
Yep,
and
it
it's
does not get any more explicit than that, you know?
exactly, and it is a brilliant four essay book, very small book. In fact, it's hard to put that book down because he broke it down from literature, culture, books, and he goes in depth. He gives you the reason why it's important to embrace the Africanness. Frantz Fanon does a more explicit, if not militant, aspect of what uh, Ngugi wa Thiong'o was doing in terms of, you know, culture, because he actually made sure that you remember what he's talking about. His books, Wretched of the Earth, that's
Yes.
one. The next one was Black Skin, White Mask. That alone talks about what the comrade is speaking to here, which is stop embracing what is not you. You cannot possibly aspire to be an European because you are not an European. You do a very bad job of it. Let the Europeans be Europeans and you be African. Be your authentic self. And then a compilation of his essays, which is the book we'll
Yes.
be looking at the end of the month, which is Towards the African Revolution. This book is ties everything together, and it's a book we'll be looking at the end of the month. So it just goes to show that the job, what this campaign is highlighting here, is work that has already been done prior to
Correct.
that, and it's not just men. Ama Ata Aido also did her part. What's the lady from who was going to come on the podcast, but passed on recently? Her name escapes me now. The lady who passed on in the United States after 4 decades in uh no, I must get that name, but I'll remember the name in the course of the program. So the reason I say all of that is yeah, the name is Misere Gita Mugo.
Right.
Yeah. So again, it's important that this job be done. The foremost of them all, Cheke Ate Diop, did establish that Kemetians, or as they are now known, Egyptians, were originally of African descent and not of any outer interplanetary bodies. So, again, kudos to Uganda here for going out of their way to say, listen, enough is enough. We've gotten independence decades ago. It's time we really assert what that independence means in terms
Yeah,
of cultural outlook. And
right.
so,
Otherwise, what's the meaning of independence, right?
yeah. I
You have
mean,
to be in control of your culture, of your production, and your sovereignty. You know.
mm, mm, mm. And also, um, it will be remiss of me if I don't mention the name of Amilcar Cabral, who actually used culture as the basis of his people revolution.
Right.
He said, first and foremost, go on, go on.
No, no, I agree with you. In fact, the Portuguese knew the importance of culture more
Mhm.
so than some African intellectuals. But
Mm,
Cabral definitely did. In fact, very interesting story. When Cabral was studying, because in many of our cases, the liberators were also schooled in the countries of the oppressors, when they had a chance to get formal education.
thank you
So
very
he
much.
was educated in Portugal, in Lisbon, you see? But during the summer vacations, he would come back to Guinea Bissau. And he had a radio station, I think, in Cape Verde. Not a radio station, but a program on a radio station.
Yeah,
And the
a
program
1
was
hour
focused
slot.
on African
Culture,
culture.
culture.
The program did not last long because the colonial authorities would obviously listen and say, wow, this thing has a connection. It resonates with the African masses. So this guy is still a student, undergraduate student. They banned his radio show. Shows you how effective any platform that discusses African culture and African
Mm,
history was, and
mm,
how the colonial regime saw that as such a threat. They banned
mm,
him. Obviously, that's when they started monitoring him as well.
mm.
Ultimately, through the time, he became the leader of the liberation movement, PAIGC, and they ended up using a stooge to assassinate him.
Fascinate him. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. So for the final story, we come to the United Kingdom, specifically to the Oxford Crown Court. And I'm sorry to have to break this news to you, but one of your nationals has been docked.
Mhm.
UN, so the story comes from the BBC. UN judge guilty of forcing women to work as slave. A United Nations judge has been convicted of forcing a young woman to work as a slave in the United Kingdom. Prosecutors said Linda Mugabe took advantage of her status over her victim by preventing her from holding down steady employment while forcing her to work as her maid and provide childcare for free. The 49-year-old, who is also a High Court judge in Uganda, was found guilty of conspiring to facilitate the commission of a breach of UK immigration law, facilitating travel with a view to exploitation, forcing someone to work, and conspiracy to intimidate a witness. She will be sentenced at Oxford Crown Court on May the 2nd. In footage released by Thames Valley Police, Mugabe appeared shocked when an officer said he was arresting her under the Modern Slavery Act. She then had a conversation with the officer in which she said, I am a judge in my country. I even have immunity. I am not a criminal. Asking to reaffirm that she had immunity, Mugabe told the officer, yes, I have a diplomatic passport. The conversation ended with the defendant saying, I came here as a student. I don't need anyone to work for me. I didn't come with her. She asked me because she had worked at my home before. She asked me, she repeated. Before I go any further, what's your initial take on this?
Well, I need more details, but we are familiar with cases of African diplomats, particularly, who subsequently have been, and you see, that's, okay. So first of all, we have many situations of exploitation back on the continent where the urban elite, and it's different. Sometimes they bring people from the rural areas who work for them as maids, as they call them, preparing food, taking care of the home, taking care of the children. In some cases, I know that the maids are paid. I know that they are, in some cases, allowed to improve their conditions in life by going to school and having some money that they can actually also send back to the rural areas, right? But we also know many situations where they're practically kept as enslaved labor, you see? Exploiting their labor. They're not getting adequate or commensurate compensation for the work that they perform. And this situation is actually ongoing as we speak in many African countries in the urban areas where the elite exploit fellow Africans that they bring in from the rural areas. So I don't have enough detail on this, but it seems to me that what might have transpired, just judging by her own words of this judge, is that she had a similar relationship with somebody who was a maid while they were in Uganda. So the question is, was she treating her fairly in Uganda? Or was she not treating her fairly? So that also will obviously determine the credibility of this judge in this case. But I guess she has now already been convicted, you see? But that's important part of the narrative. But also, we know that they're very loose with these laws. As we speak right now, there are many diplomats, not only African diplomats, by the way, but from, from Asia, from South America, from the Caribbean, maybe from other European countries as well, right? Who have somebody from their home country, right? Who is providing labor for them. The labor laws in many of these countries, such as Britain, for example, right, are very different from the labor laws in the countries from where they come. Or it's different in the sense that in these countries like Britain and other places, they're much more likely to enforce those laws. Because she may have laws in Uganda as well, but they may not be enforced. So I'm not saying she was exploiting this lady while they were in Uganda, but if she was, maybe it's because the laws in Uganda were not being enforced. So that's just the context that I want to, put out there.
Yeah. Okay. So I would finish up, and there she is. And so gaps were heard from the public gallery as the verdicts were given, and the court was cleared as the defendants appeared unwell. Caroline Hoxie, King's Counsel, prosecuting, told jurors during the trial Linda Mugabe had exploited and abused her alleged victim, taking advantage of her lack of understanding of her rights to properly paid employment and deceiving her as to the purpose of her coming to the UK. She alleged Mugabe who was studying for a law PhD at the University of Oxford, had conspired with Ugandan's Deputy High Commissioner John Leonard Mugabe to arrange for the young woman to come to the UK. Prosecutors said the pair participated in a very dishonest trade-off in which Mugabe arranged for the Ugandan High Commission to sponsor the woman's entrance into the United Kingdom. In exchange, Ms. Mugabe would attempt to speak to a judge who was in charge of a legal action Mr. Mugabe was named in. Oh. Okay.
I see. So now there's a alleged quid pro quo involved, which even makes it much more complicated beyond just the labor exploitation of somebody's labor. Yeah, now you have a conspiracy to bring her in unlawfully under false pretext. And in return, you are going to actually obstruct justice as part of the
Yeah.
quid pro quo. Okay,
Yes.
now I see it.
So, it's like you said, it's emblematic of people who use. I mean, the fact that she cited diplomatic immunity immediately she knew she was wrong. She was in the wrong, because if you've got nothing to hide, you start you know while you're arresting me, you prove your case and that's it. But citing diplomatic immunity at the fact that you're being arrested means you knew clearly well that you are not on solid ground.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think obviously this is I wouldn't be surprised if there's some African diplomats now sending people back home very quickly who have been providing labor for them, you see? Yeah, because obviously they're not paying them the wage rates that would prevail in the United Kingdom, you see?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, so, I mean, that said, we've come to the end of another exciting program, and I hope you got valuable information from it. Again, like we said, share, like, subscribe to the channel. And we also do, in the course of the week, Women and Resistance, which is a podcast that showcase the contribution of women in African history, that I do with Sister Aya Fubera and Eli Esquire. So that is Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Again, we continue to grow. Do support what we do here. You can contribute to our Patreon. Sign up to sharing our content wherever it comes across your timeline. Each one teach one, each one reach one, as they say. So
absolutely.
Thank you again, comrade, for coming through.
And, my pleasure always, man.
Your words.
It's important for us to continue sharing light with sisters and brothers, and also, of course, welcoming their own input and suggestions if they want us to evaluate and critique any media outlet. Just let us know.
Yeah,
we're happy to do that. It's a collective effort,
collective effort, yes. And yes, drop your likes, your comments at the bottom of the video. Like the good comrade said, if you have stories that you think we should run, put it in the comments. Any way that we can improve the program, put it in the comments. We'll take it on board. And again, till we come again next week, comrade.
A luta continua.
Victory Aseta, and from me is Adesoji, and it's goodbye for now. And God bless.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Wow. I like 100%. It when it's instant, man. Yeah. Let me go and dive back into my books, comrade.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You made my day just by holding up that book that I just finished reading last week.
God.